Wish you could become a morning person? You know the type, up before the sun, early morning runs, first one to the office with donuts and a smile. How do they do it? Easy. With the new Galaxy Watch 8, sleep tracking and personalized insights from Samsung Health help you improve so you can wake up to a whole new you. One who, dare I say it, skips the snooze? It's possible. Train your sleep with Galaxy Watch 8. Learn more at Samsung.com. Requires compatible Samsung Galaxy phone, Samsung Health app, and Samsung account.
Hey, Fidelity. How can I remember to invest every month?
With the Fidelity app, you can choose a schedule and set up recurring investments in stocks and ETFs.
Oh, that sounds easier than I thought.
You got this.
Yeah, I do. Now, where did I put my keys?
You will find them where you left them.
Investing involves risk, including risk of loss. Fidelity Brokerage Services, LLC, member NYSE, SIPC.
Atheists, agnostics, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government.
Welcome to The Politics Guys, a place for bipartisan, rational, and civil debate on American politics and policy. I'm Northern Kentucky University political scientist Michael Baranowski. I'm joined today by not one, but two conservative counterparts. We've got Cincinnati area attorney Joey Ashbrook and University of Austin economist and former congressional staffer Tim Kaine. Joey and Tim, I'm glad to be here with you guys today.
Mike, good to see you again.
Yeah, same here. Great to have you outnumbered.
Yeah.
Or I should say see you, right? We're seeing you because we're using Riverside now. We can see each other, which means I can't be as mean as usual.
Yeah. Exactly. Well, for me, I was thinking about this, and I thought, I am outnumbered, so I will have to be like Fezzik the Giant in Princess Bride. I have to take on multiple adversaries. Let's see if I'm up to the task. Let's hope I don't get completely demolished. But in any case, I'm sure we'll have a good time. But before we do get started, I want to thank Kevin, who's a longtime supporter who recently increased his level of support, as well as Tammy, who's a new free trial supporter on Patreon, which is a thing you can do. So Kevin, Tammy, thank you very much. We really do appreciate your support. All right, so we start off today with, of course, the government shutdown. And we saw this coming, at least I think most of us saw this coming, when first off, congressional Republicans decided to put together a continuing resolution, or CR, to keep the government funded without involving Democrats, even though they knew they'd need Democrat votes. I mean, they were daring the Democrats to stop them, and the Democrats, who, as a minority party, we don't have a lot of leverage most of the time these days, Democrats haven't blinked, at least not yet. And both sides seem to be working pretty darn hard to put the blame on the other team. You've seen government websites, calling out radical left Democrats. Both sides are doing this. It's par for the course in a shutdown. And the Trump administration is trying to up the pressure on congressional Democrats through billions of dollars in project cancellations in states with Democratic senators, with New York State, home to, of course, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer and House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, particularly being hard hit with this. And the administration, of course, paints a different picture of this. Vice President Vance told reporters, "We want to do everything that we can do to help the American people. But when the Democrats shut down the government, we really have to adjust. We have to actually do a little triage to make sure the most critical and the most essential services are provided." And, the administration's actions here will almost certainly be challenged in court. Well, those wheels of justice, they tend to turn slowly when they turn at all. So legal or not, this could have an impact on potentially wavering Democrats. But at this point, both sides seem fairly dug in. Republicans pushing for a clean CR, meaning no major additions or cuts to the previous budget, whereas Democrats are calling for extending those COVID-era Affordable Care Act subsidies that are set to expire at the end of the year. They also would like to see restoration of the Medicaid cuts from the OBBB and restrictions on President Trump's ability to unilaterally cancel congressionally approved funding. Now, the party in power is generally seen as being responsible for, keeping the government running, and they're usually blamed for shutdowns. A poll this week from the Washington Post suggests this could be the case here as well. 47% of respondents said Trump and Republicans in Congress were responsible, compared to only 30% saying it's the fault of Democrats in Congress, with 23% going, I don't know. And if we break this down by party affiliation, the poll found that 8% of Republicans blamed their own party for the shutdown, compared to just 2% of Democrats saying their side is to blame. And if we look at independents, half blame Trump and the Republicans, while only 22% see Democrats as being at fault at this point. So, Joey, I guess I'll start with you here. What do you think about who's responsible for this shutdown? And maybe more importantly, who a majority of the public is likely to blame for it?
Well, I think both of those answers at the end of the day are going to be the Democrats, because the Democrats are not voting for the ability to keep the government open. And I think the message for the Republicans is not that difficult to deliver. And the Dems so far don't appear to have a unified message, because you've got the dynamic of more of the left influences in the party that I think are making the party do things that folks like Chuck Schumer 5 to 10 years ago, there's no way they would have ever done. And I don't think the message is very effective for them right now. And it's simple to be able to say, why can't you just vote for a continuation of what you did in the Biden era when he was president? It's just because it's Trump derangement syndrome and you just want to obstruct what's going on in the government. And I think folks are likely to see that ultimately laid at the feet of the Democrats, but time's going to tell. But I think you see some left side personalities start to voice that view. Van Jones was on Bill Maher's program very recently and expressed that type of view and basically said, I talked to Chuck Schumer about this kind of thing about 6 months ago, and he said shutdowns are stupid. And now he's doing it. And I think that's a reflection of his concern of his own seat in New York from AOC and folks coming from the hard left, which I think is just the reality of the Democratic Party right now. Time will tell, but the messaging is simple for the Republicans. The Democrats seem a little disorganized in their messaging, and I think that it's ultimately going to lay at the feet of the Dems.
Jim, what are your thoughts on that?
I'm trying to channel my dad, recently deceased dad who's like, he's in that block of percentages going, what the hell is going on? I don't get this at all. I'm kind of in that boat. I've noticed my research is taking me in a different direction. I'll talk about some numbers, but I do think it's funny. Like, we're going to have a fight over how much money we spend. And while we were fighting, we ran out of money. So, that looks comical. And I think the typical American, channeling dad here, they've gotten numb to this, right? Mike, you were telling us before we sat down here formally that there's been something like 10 shutdowns in the last 20 years, and I don't think there really were any. Maybe there were some in the Reagan era, but they lasted 3 days. So this is like the fourth or fifth. Feels like a big one. It's going on already now for multiple days. So I don't quite get it. The big observation I have, and I pulled up the numbers, just simple big numbers that we can all remember. The CBO had forecast the deficit this fiscal year is going to end at $1.8 trillion. Now, most Americans, a billion, trillion, whatever, 1.8 trillion. It sounds like a lot, but they've got it under control. No, let me make sure I get the right numbers for us here. They've spent, or will spend, with one more month left in this fiscal year, $6.2 trillion, and revenue's been $4.4 trillion. I mean, if your kid, you said your allowance is $4.40, and they said, well, I spent $6.20, you'd be like, kid, you don't know how to do math. Where's that extra money coming from? Here's what's crazy, and why I agree with Joey, is the Democrats say, no, we need to spend more. That's essentially what the fight's over. Nobody really seems to be taking the deficit seriously. I would suggest, and Mike, here's my question back. Republicans have the majority in the House. Why can't they just pass their own bill? I think there's this rebellious cohort among Republicans that are thinking like me and my dad think, like, no, we're not going to approve any spending resolution until you balance it. And I think let's tip our cap to them.
So that's the Thomas Masseys and the Rand Pauls of the Republican coalition certainly were some of the votes against that sort of thing. I actually, when it comes to responsibility, I actually agree with the Republicans on this. As much as it pains me, it's Joey, as you pointed out, Republicans are saying we want a clean CR, a more or less clean CR, as clean as they get, and Democrats are saying, no, we want other stuff. And so, to me, that logic is pretty straightforward. The Democrats are responsible for the shutdown because they said no to continuing funding the government as it was. But while I see it that way, I also think that a lot of people, regular Americans, aren't going to get into the weeds on all this and how many votes you need and Senate filibusters and all that sort of thing. They're just going to say, hey, who's in charge? Well, the Republicans are in charge, and it's their problem to solve. Now, I don't think that's actually right, but I think that might be what the public perception is. But Joy, as you pointed out, time's going to tell, because I think that those initial polls don't really give us a sense of how the messaging is going to work on this sort of thing and how it's going to affect a lot of regular Americans. So on that, I'm kind of I think Democrats, we did cause this thing, and we caused this thing I understand why we caused this thing, certainly, because as I said, we don't have a lot of leverage most of the time. This is one of the very few pressure points that we actually have, and we're actually pushing on what's a good issue for our party. I mean, if Republicans don't end up extending ACA subsidies, whether it's in this CR or whether it's later in the regular budget, I think they're going to get the blame when the average annual premium doubles or more. And the biggest hits on this are going to come to middle-income people, small business owners. And we're talking a lot of folks, 22, 24 million American people who receive ACA premium subsidies, and a lot of them are in Republican congressional districts, which is why we're already hearing rumblings from inside the Trump administration or people close to the administration saying, listen, they think they probably going to need to make a deal here on this. And you could hear Thune and other folks saying, well, we're willing to talk, but not as long as you're essentially holding government funding hostage. And so I think that it's a good issue for Democrats, and they're betting on the fact that the healthcare thing is a much bigger, stronger sort of thing than a government shutdown that a lot of folks are going to basically have more or less forgotten about before the midterms. I don't know. What do you guys want to comment on that?
To Tim's point, people are kind of numb to it. When you're numb to something, the fine line becomes, when do theatrics become annoying? If you're making my life harder and you're wasting my time and my energy when I turn on the news, that has a real potential boomerang additional risk for the Dems on this. Your analysis on the Unaffordable Care Act is is astute. I think that is probably a smarter way to play it for the Dems. And there's a larger structural issue that many of us on the right were yelling about when the Unaffordable Care Act was working its way through Congress.
Nice, Joey.
This is a nightmare, and that's where we are. So there has to be some structural reform dynamics that happen, but it's going to be interesting. I just think that right now, President Trump's communication machine and the way against the Dems' disarrayed communication right now that is being animalistically buttressed by the more leftist influences in the party is an advantage for the GOP with the majority of the American electorate.
I want to throw in some numbers. The reversing or keeping those ACA subsidies would cost around $350 billion over a decade. Now, the other big ask, much bigger ask that the Democrats are pushing for that I'm fairly certain they won't get is those Medicaid cuts in the OBBB. That would actually cost taking those back would cost somewhere over, I think, $1 trillion over a decade. That's not going to happen. And that's getting into real money. I think even as a Democrat, I can agree that, that's real money. But again, if you look at the numbers on support, this isn't exactly an 80-20 issue, but when you ask people whether these ACA subsidies should be extended, 95% of Democrats, 80% of independents. Now, of course, only 38% of Republicans, but still, that's an awful lot of folks. And as you guys both know, and I'm sure, as you point out, Unaffordable Care Act, well, once you give people a benefit, even if it's a short-term COVID-era subsidy, which is what those extended subsidies were supposed to be, pulling that sucker back makes people pretty pissed off, because if they go into the marketplace right now, and pretty soon we're going to be at the time for that renewal period, and all of a sudden they see that their premiums have literally doubled or possibly even tripled, some people are reporting, that's going to freak them out, and they're going to be talking to their members of Congress, which is why I think in the end, even if the Democrats give on the shutdown fight, I think they have the better issue here.
My quick take is I do know what's caused this. Congress got in a habit of passing things, and they would authorize funding for them for 10 years or 5 years. So it's sort of like this, well, we have all these puppies, but we put a bomb under them. And if you don't defuse the bomb, they give us money and they're all those puppies. Like, it's a terrible, it's like fear-based, baked in the cake governing. And so then, okay, what are people really afraid of? And I can tell you now, I've got my adult children out there. I don't think they'll ever afford a home. That's really frustrating. It's sort of like this deep fear. The big fear is, what if one of them gets hurt? And they're independent now, right? They've got their own health insurance. So one of my daughters calls me the other day like, Dad, I just went in for my annual checkup. Beautiful girl, totally healthy. Thousands of dollars, multiple bills. Do I have to pay this? Turns out she didn't. We went online together, checked her insurance. They were saying don't pay. So the hospital is sending her bills. Doctors are sending her other bills. The testing center. Who built this stupid healthcare system? So I don't think, frankly, Democrats running on, Obamacare subsidies, I just don't think it's got enough resonance for a win, because there's anger out there. I thought Obamacare was supposed to fix it all. And instead, we're in a world that's a lot scarier than the one I remember. And there are way too many people, Mike, that know I used to have pretty simple healthcare. And I had lower premiums and I had lower this, and I was told I could keep it. There's a real resentment that all these experts were true. The other thing people fear, of course, is crime. I don't think the fight over this, I don't like the way it's going, and I know we'll get into it, but that has a lot more resonance than a budget ticky-tacky, Obamacare subsidies or not. I don't think it moves the needle. I think the crime thing's really moving the needle right now.
We'll find out. I would disagree with that. I think that once people actually see that sticker shock, if they in fact do that, that's going to be a big deal. But time will tell on that for sure. And I guess the thing with the shutdown is, someone's going to have to give it some point. It can take a while. The longest ever government shutdown, 34 days. That came in the first Trump administration.
Oh, is that right?
In that case, that was when Democrats took control of the House partway through after the 2018 midterms. That's a little different situation. But pretty clearly, the plan by the administration, at least, is to target agencies that are important to Democrats or funding. President Trump has said he wants to cut the many Democrat agencies, most of which are a political scam, in a post earlier this week. And again, a lot of this stuff is legally questionable, but that doesn't really matter so much because that's going to take a while to work its way through the courts and so forth. And we already have lawsuits from several federal worker unions who are arguing that the RIFs, or reductions in force, they don't have the statutory authority to do that. We'll see how that plays out. But Tim, what do you think? How long do you think this might go on, and who do you expect to say uncle first?
It's fascinating because I think the risk of it going on is directly tied to how numb Americans have become. And it feels to me they become awfully numb. I don't think there's enough pain right now to resolve it. Now, part of me wants to make jokes about it. So if I go to the airport and the TSA is not there and I can just walk to my plane, I'll be like, keep it up, guys. Let's shut her down, because that is a waste of everybody's time and we all know it, right? So, but I don't know where the pain points are going to be. To me, I'm in that category of, I don't know what's happening. I don't exactly know why. I don't know how it resolves. Maybe the Republicans start to work with their fellow Republicans and pass a bill that's acceptable to the Freedom Caucus. So I have no idea. I'm just along for the ride.
What about you, Joey?
I think that in the chaos of the shutdown dynamics, where the president's got practically even more ability to reduce wasteful aspects of the federal government and reform the swamp, one way to think about it. And that's a problem for the Dems too. So I think that the left's intransigence related to forcing the more moderate members and leaders of their party to shut it down, because obstructionism is the only thing right now the only safe issue for a Democrat politician right now is to dislike Trump. That's the only one. There's not a lot of substance otherwise coming out of the Democratic Party, because they have those hard leftist influences that are real constituencies of their party. And so when you talk about almost any issue, there's no substance coming out of what Democrats are talking about. And I think it's a reflection of the broken nature of the party and the leftist constituencies. And so the only thing that's safe to talk about, the only thing that you can have everybody kind of like you about, is hating Trump.
I think what's going to end up happening here, and I think anyone who says they know what's going to end up happening here is just, totally delusional or trying to sell somebody something. But I think what ends up happening is Democrats end up voting at least a few Democrats, because they only need like 5 senators, essentially. And I can see where they can maybe pick up both Arizona senators, Kelly Gallego, maybe Hickenlooper in Colorado's kind of very pragmatic, centrist sort of guy. Kim in New Jersey, Ossoff in Georgia going to have a tough time ahead of him, and possibly Peters in Michigan, who's retiring. So I can see how the numbers might come together, and I think they're going to say, you know what, we will agree to voting for a clean CR as long as you agree to have some sort of serious discussions about how we're going to extend at least some of these ACA subsidies. And I think what's going to happen is it won't probably be everything that Democrats want, but I think they're going to get something on that just simply because it's such a this is one issue that just polls super well for Democrats. And I think it's going to end up where they'll end up blinking first on the shutdown because they're the ones whose votes have to come to end this whole thing. But I do think there's going to end up being some extension of these ACA subsidies, not for nearly as long as my party wants or as I want, not making them permanent. But I think we're going to see something on that. And Rand Paul, Thomas Massie, and so forth will scream bloody murder. But I think they'll just have enough votes to squeeze that thing through. Though God only knows what's going to happen when the CR's over. Then we have to work on the real budget. But that's a whole other issue. I don't know.
You may be right. You may be right, Mike, about that.
Any other thoughts on this continuing shutdown, guys?
I think we'll talk about it next time.
You think? I'm hoping that'll be solved. But like I said, I'm hoping we're not in for setting a record on this. But God only knows. We will see. So, all right.
Getting ready to step into your career era? Set yourself apart with Adobe Creative Cloud Pro for students. Hone your skills with apps like Photoshop, Illustrator, Premiere Pro, and more, powered with the latest in creative AI. Students save over 55% so you can build a portfolio you're proud of. Launch your future with Adobe Creative Cloud Pro for students. Visit adobe.com/students to learn more.
At Blinds.com, it's not just about window treatments. It's about you, your style, your space, your way. Whether you DIY or want the pros to handle it all, you'll have the confidence of knowing it's done right. From free expert design help to our 100% satisfaction guarantee, everything we do is made to fit your life and your windows. Because at Blinds.com, the only thing we treat better than windows is you. Visit Blinds.com now for up to 50% off primetime deals and free professional installation. Rules and restrictions apply.
Well, why don't we move from shutdowns to big military speeches and a sort of unprecedented sort of thing? What do you think?
Yeah, ready. Let's do it. All right. So let me introduce, you guys may recall the president. Well, let me start with Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, called together hundreds of generals. I've actually was trying to figure out exactly how many generals, and I'm not sure, but he called hundreds of generals together to come to Washington, D.C. for a speech. Now, a lot of noise was made about this, that this is so unprecedented. And honestly, you guys know I served in the Air Force, and I've written 2 books about how to reform the leadership structure. I thought, didn't they do this all the time? Like, don't you get all your guys together? So it was weird that people thought that was strange. But anyway, it was in Quantico, Virginia on September 30th. So not quite a week ago, but close. And Pete Hegseth spoke first. The Secretary of War was planning to give a speech, and it was a long one, bordering on an hour. But that really turned out to be an introduction because President Trump spoke after him. And I think it's really interesting to get into the details of what they said. Now, a little bit of context. I'm a fan of Pete Hegseth. I think people have gone after him as a lightweight, not realizing that he served himself, that he's a Princeton graduate, that he was set up a nonprofit to do defense reform before he became a Fox News analyst. And as Joey and Mike, trying to stay on top of issues, if you're one of these guys that works at Fox or CNN, there's not enough respect for how sharp they have to be every day. So I've always been a Hegseth fan, but mainly because he's one of the few people that reached out to me when I published my first book on the military. I didn't know who the heck the guy was, obscure, small time. He's just, I think he hustles, and I think he's way more thoughtful than people give him credit for. Now, this speech that he gave, I think you could highlight a few things that he's really trying to emphasize. Number one is, let's end the war on warriors. And that was the title of his book. There are a couple elements of that. One is they're really going after DEI. I think, what was it? Well, let me read a quote from it first. Pete Hegseth said, We have to be prepared to move my screen around to get this right. We have to be prepared for war, not for defense. So they were calling it a second liberation day. We're training warriors, not defenders. We fight wars to win, not to defend. Defense is something you do all the time. It's inherently reactionary and can lead to overuse, overreach, and mission creep. War is something you do sparingly, on your own terms, with clear aims. We fight to win. We unleash overwhelming and punishing violence on the enemy. Now, the speech itself was incredibly eloquent. I think there's something really important to notice here. While they're talking tough, and I think they mean it, and I think there was beautiful rhetoric in this speech, this Trump administration's really against mission creep. Donald Trump did not start wars, and I think you'll see him avoid those. We've almost forgotten the B-2 mission that flew into Iran and dropped the biggest bomb in our arsenal on the Iranians. That's it. There was no ground force. There was no let's do regime change. We're really trying to prevent future nuclear conflict. That's the Trump Hegseth style. Secondly, there's criticism of woke culture. So no more, I don't remember the exact languages, no more celebration months of this diverse group or that diverse group. Let's have unity. I think that issue has turned. Maybe it's because of the trans thing. Maybe Americans are sick of being divided, but the military just won't be doing it anymore. And then the third thing was that Hegseth went after promoting standards. Now that on the front, he's like, I'm tired of seeing fat troops in formation and fat generals. He was using, strong language. But anybody who serves says, yeah, it's true. Standards have fallen. This might be interpreted in terms of men versus women, but Hegseth made it really clear he's not against women serving in the military, but he's against having lower standards. There's one strong standard. He's against having people wearing beards around when they shouldn't be with lame excuses. And he's really against, this one's where you step into controversial territory, going after anonymous complaints, the whistleblower complaints that have supposedly gotten out of control. Next, Trump came on stage, and I don't know if there was a really distinct theme that he made that Hegseth didn't already made, other than that there was a lot of alignment. So was it a big deal? I don't think there was anything that came out of it that was incredibly newsworthy. It was really a continuation of things we've heard before, but making it very distinct and very clear. So again, I'm a fan of this. Other people thought it was an extremely partisan speech. Certainly when Donald Trump talks, he doesn't have a partisan, nonpartisan filter. As far as the policies, I think he's on the absolutely right track. The DEI has been too divisive. Here's the one thing that's probably going to raise feathers, and maybe rightfully. Trump talked about sending troops into U.S. cities. That started with D.C. and sort of a deployment in police. Now, we're talking about Portland and Chicago. I know Joey's going to go into that, but he did mention it in this speech and said, I think these should be good training grounds. That's language that I think right and left, people thought, no, let's not train on fighting the American citizens. So I understand how that one maybe landed wrong, but I think the rest of it landed right. So Mike, how about you? Was this alarming to you?
Well, I started off by, I saw the news reports before I actually had a chance to listen to or read the transcripts of the speeches. And so I was expecting it to be the worst thing ever based on the media reports. And it wasn't. It wasn't completely awful. I'll say that. Let me start with the things that I actually think are not completely awful. And that is, he's right about people and culture. He said that no plan, no program, no reform is going to work if you don't have the right people and the right culture. And he's 100% on that. I totally agree. Personnel is policy. He said
personnel is policy, right?
Yeah. And I think it's right to focus on standards. I agree with him that in combat arms position, which is around a third of the military, roughly, that there should be a set minimum standard, and that should be gender neutral. If you can't meet that standard, whether you're a male or a female potential machine gunner or what grunt or what have you, well then you don't meet that standard. I think that's perfectly okay. And so that's the part I was like, well, okay, that's fine. Now I thought, well, you really need to gather hundreds of generals together and spend $6 million and get one of those big NFL-sized flags to walk behind to pretend like you're Patton to do that sort of thing? I don't think so, but okay. And so I think that was the good stuff. But I also think that the standards thing was a bit performative, a bit overkill. He talked about this is just the broken windows theory of policing that comes to the military. If the broken windows theory, for people who don't know, is this idea that, well, if you allow little things to go like broken windows or like people who haven't shaved, well, that's going to cause bigger problems. Well, I guess Pete Hegseth didn't get the memo, but the broken windows theory of policing has been pretty roundly debunked for now the last 20 years or so, but okay, fine, whatever.
Wow, Mike, I got to stop. I'm not sure I buy that. But, I think we have stopped trying to police petty crime in our cities. We're veering into the crime and away from this. Let me focus you on the wars. Like, do you agree with me that Trump talks tough, but he's actually following a policy where he thinks he's different from George Bush and Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton? He's not letting our troops be overused.
Oh, yeah, I think Donald Trump, whenever you would ask me the question, does Donald Trump think he's different? Well, yeah, Donald Trump thinks he's different than everyone because he thinks he's a whole lot better. Donald Trump was right about everything. I mean, there's even a hat, right? I've seen it on the Oval Office desk. So, yeah, of course, Donald Trump thinks he's an infallible being. So, yeah, he's different for sure. No question. Joey, what do you think? We haven't had a review of this one yet.
Makes sense to me. That you'd want to get all of your leaders together and explain the vision and make sure everybody's on the same page. Yeah, especially when you're trying to drive some change. And the changes make sense to me too. That's what we want our military to be about: is winning wars and not about culture change or being an institution that can be changed or captured by our enemies by infusing different thought than the Western civilization values that America is largely the central pillar defending today in the world. So I thought it was effective, and I thought it made sense to me. Of course, anything that rolls out, there's got to be opposition to it. But I thought it was effective. I thought your guys' dialogue was interesting and fun, too. I know this is a particular segment for the two of you bantering back and forth, but I thought the president and the Secretary of Defense did a nice job.
Secretary of War,
I want to say, go ahead,
right.
Tim.
Tim, you're right. Nope, wrong. I am wrong. The Secretary of War. You're right. Absolutely.
Good.
Well, the official name of the department is still Defense, so either is actually appropriate.
Okay.
And so I'll go with Defense. But I thought it was interesting how he went on about fat generals, and there was a lot on fat generals. But in the same speech, when he was talking about the direction he wants us to go in as a military, he mentions Norman Schwarzkopf. Now, you take a look at a picture of Norman Schwarzkopf. This is not a svelte guy, but I think the point here's the point is not everyone in the military is a warrior. Just like not everyone in the military is a hero. My God, that drives me freaking nuts. I mean, I didn't feel particularly heroic or anything like that. But the thing is standards make sense when they make sense. And so Norman Schwarzkopf was a great general. He didn't need to run a 4.340 or something like that. And so you match, and I bring this up because I think it's important to have the right people with the right skills. And if you impose certain qualifications that don't make sense for the job, you run into problems. I mean, all of the branches have struggled to meet recruiting goals, and with the exception of my Marine Corps, they've adjusted by lowering their standards. And so this is going to make things a lot difficult. I'm for standards when they make sense. But when they don't make sense, when it's just, well, shave because I'm Pete Hegseth and I say shave, I don't really get how that exactly makes a lot of sense. So again, I feel like a lot of it was kind of performative, at least on
So Mike, there's another aspect to this, which is that he'd said he wants to shake up the civilian side of the military as well. Now, there's a notion out there that so few people serve, it's the real 1%. Put out numbers that actually, if we're talking about veterans who served once in their life, it's closer to 10% of Americans have worn the uniform. And it's even higher number of those who served on the civilian side. But the same thing plagues the War Department that plagues other departments, that with government workers who come in, you get a high salary and you're basically guaranteed a job for life. It's this institutionalized bureaucracy. The generals can come and go, right? The general might be in place for a year, 2 years, 3 years. Then they're rotating out, whereas the civilians are there. And to me, this is one of the subtleties I picked up in the speech, that he wants to have not only standards for the military, but new standards of performance, new maybe variability in pay. That'd be a shocker. And better feedback loop, because this is a lot that's wrong, are the performance evaluations in the military. Everybody walks on water. Like, we've known that we need to bring in some more detail. But I do want to read this, a shout out to My classmates from the Air Force Academy, I was in the class of Mighty 90, 1990. So here I get to Pete Hegseth's speech, and he goes, quote, "Here are two basic frameworks I urge you to pursue in this process. Standards, I call. My staff's heard all about them. The 1990 test, yes. And the E6 test, the 90 test is simple. What were the military standards in 1990? I think he's exactly right. They've never been higher than, my proud classmates and I are laughing about this. So he does want to go back to the standards, make them high, not have them be flexible for different groups. And then the E6 test is basically let's get the bureaucracy out of the way so that the E6 can have a job that's easier instead of more complicated. And it'll be interesting to see how those cash out. But Mike, do you want to make any comment about the government workforce and performance evals, anything like that?
I'm sort of two minds on the civilian side of it. The military side's a kind of a different thing, but I certainly think that everyone should be held to account for the work that they do. And you have issues with a civil service protections, and sometimes that can be problematic. And so there's always going to be, I think, a necessary tension there. And I think it's especially important when we talk about things like national defense, where this is obviously arguably the most vital thing that our government does. And so I understand having standards on both sides and accountability on both sides. And I'm completely for that sort of thing. So, for instance, let's say you include a journalist on a signal chat and give away intelligence information about that, well, maybe there should be some consequences for that, even if you are the Secretary of Defense or War and have a big flag you get to walk behind. I don't know. So, yes, I think there should be accountability all the way down from the secretary to the person who's mopping the floors of the Pentagon. Absolutely.
But can you imagine them having sort of a Welch rule where it's the players, B players, C players among the civilian corps, the A players get a pay bonus, the C players can just be let go. Not because they committed a crime, you're just not performing. I mean, can you imagine that in the federal government workforce?
That would be a big change for sure.
Well, they're doing well with recruiting in general, though, fellas, right now. And I think some of this goes to, and the standards and recruiting goes to the heart of some of Secretary Hegseth's impulses, which is that you can improve recruiting not by lowering standards, but by raising honor. And that there's an element of moral and mission clarity for America that feeds into that. And if you're our enemy and you're our adversary, and you're China or you're someone else, you want to delude the clarity and the honor of being in the military. You want to help it be as bureaucratically numbing as humanly possible, because that undermines the edge of clarity and focus and resolve to do what's needed to be done if it's ever needed to be done.
Yeah. Joe, it's such a good point. So I'm glad you brought it up. Just a couple years ago, we were hearing about the recruiting crisis. The Army, the Navy, all the branches had a very hard time. They were not fulfilling the basic needs just of warm bodies in uniform. And a lot of people wanted to talk about, well, kids aren't as healthy. That was not the issue. The polls showed that very few young Americans wanted to serve. And yet it was bizarre to me that this happened after roughly 20 years of war. We didn't have a recruiting problem for the 20 years because there was that moral clarity you talked about. Americans were responding to the sound of the guns. And this goes back 50 years ago when folks said an all-volunteer force could never work. We needed conscription. Standing Iraq proved we didn't. The patriotic Americans did volunteer to serve. Only when those wars ended, in the last 2 years of the Biden administration, did we have that crisis. Suddenly it's turned around. So there's a real story there.
Yeah. And it's not about bad pay or bad benefits. I mean, we have really solid military pay and benefits at this point. Last year, there was a 14.5% raise for junior enlisted folks, and that puts them actually at over the 90th percentile compared to folks with similar education in the civilian world. And junior officers are around the 75th percentile. So this is not, it's not like you're being asked to, go into poverty or something like that, especially when you consider all the benefits that accrue to members of the military. It can be a pretty good thing. I mean, I'm somebody, I didn't go into it for the benefits, but we talked about healthcare before. I don't have to worry about any of that stuff now because the VA is taking care of my healthcare, and that's an enormous benefit that I didn't ask for. I'm certainly happy to get, and that's a big deal.
Mike, I didn't realize there was that 14.5% pay raise, which is really good when there's only 17% inflation, right? So it's
But I mean, I think though in part, and sometimes I worry. I say, well, I know I'm this sort of older guy, and I'm thinking, well, am I this older guy who's saying, my God, it was better when it was tough in my day. In my boot camp, they could put their hands on you, and it was tough. And now the kids today are all coddled. I don't want to be that guy. But I admit there's a part of me that when I heard Hegseth's part saying, the training should be tough and scary and all that. And I think, well, yeah. And I feel like our kids today soft? I don't know. They feel softer than kids when I was growing up, but maybe that's just me, romanticizing my brutal past. I don't know.
Well, at the Air Force Academy, the tradition was when I went there, they would bring in a class of about 1,400, 500 students and expect to graduate 950. So you knew that there was this line that they would use on every incoming class. You'd sit in this giant assembly hall, like all these generals assembled before Hegseth, say, look to your left, look to your right. One of the three of you won't be here in a year or by the time you graduate. The new philosophy at the academies is they bring in a lot smaller classes, 1,100, and they'll only lose about 50, not to honor violations, not to physical standards, not to GPA. It's just like, let's support everybody. It's maybe, it's health issues which somebody has, which isn't that, that's natural. I was shocked that sort of toughening, the idea that you're going to steal young soldiers is out at my alma mater. And I'm assuming it's the same in the ranks for enlisteds at the other academies. So, I do believe let's get a little tougher at least, maybe not all the way back to the Stone Age.
Yeah. And I guess when I'm thinking about these speeches, I sort of separate Hegseth and Trump because I feel like if President Trump Donald Trump gets in front of a crowd, he has one mode, and it's campaign mode. It's rally mode. And we saw that, and he can do that in his sleep, I'm sure, at this point, because he's done it thousands of times. And that whole cringy I'm rewatching The Office, these like super fan episodes with all deleted scenes, and his opening. I mentioned this because his opening to the generals reminded me, it was a very Michael Scottish sort of thing, saying like, oh, it's really quiet here. Well, you can walk out if you want, but you're going to lose your job and so forth. I could totally see that being like a Michael Scott at Dunder Mifflin saying that to, I don't know, but it was kind of cringy. It's clearly not the audience that Donald Trump wants. I mean, these guys were not going to applaud because that's just not what you do in the military. It's not appropriate to be partisan in that sort of environment. And I feel it was very inappropriate for for President Trump to inject that sort of partisanship into that sort of thing. I mean, putting aside the whole, well, let's train on our cities. They're the enemy within and they're the worst. But but again, I understand Donald Trump's like the scorpion. He is what he is, and he's gonna give you that same sort of thing. I don't really expect anything different from him then. And the many, many lies. I mean, I should be used to that by now. We haven't had a crime in Washington in so long because we got the lunatics. I'm pretty sure there is more than zero crime. It's not like it's some crime-free Shangri-La because we sent some guard troops in.
It's gotten better though, Mike. It's gotten better.
It did get better. Yes, it did get better. But better isn't enough. No, better has to be the best. It's the safest city in the history of human civilization. I'm pretty sure that's... Anyway.
Well, there are certainly conservatives out there who don't like what the president's done. They want to see those democratic cities burned to the ground, but through their own fault. So it's a real moral dilemma. And this is a tee up for Joey to, I think, go into our Portland segment.
So, gentlemen, we'll go ahead and transition here to quite possibly the single largest siege of federal assets since Fort Sumter. Now, for more than 100 days, our federal facilities in Portland, Oregon have been under siege with assaults, explosions, and even a guillotine. Antifa is at the gates, and the president is going to put a stop to it. Do you see this being effective? Do you see it as an overreach? And some questions to talk about. What is Antifa? And we'll get into the designating Antifa as a domestic terrorist organization by recent executive order, and potential legislation winding its way through Congress to do the same. So, gentlemen, in Portland, enemy at the gates that must be stopped or government overreach? Which is it?
I think you guys know where I'm going to land on this one, right? It's fairly obvious. Now, I got to say, I will give the administration credit for fantastic writing on this. I love there was a White House article on troops going into Portland, and how it opened. Brilliant. Give this guy a raise. The radical left's reign of terror in Portland ends now, with President Donald J. Trump mobilizing federal resources to stop Antifa-led hellfire in its tracks. I mean, that's good writing. I'll give him credit for that. I roll my eyes because, number one, Antifa isn't an organization. There's no leader. There's no organizational structure. Okay, it's this sort of broad, sort of weird movement, I guess, maybe an ideology, though not even necessarily really an ideology, because there are different strains of thought in what people different call themselves Antifa, but it's not an organization as such. But I get why Donald Trump and the Trump administration would focus on that, because it's good to have an enemy you can sink your teeth into. And you can't just say, well, sure, these radical lunatics here and there that believe different things. No, it's better to say it's Antifa. What is it? Well, it's what we are against. It's like on the left it's the same sort of thing when we say, well, those fascists on the right. Well, who exactly what? No, it's just, you need a name. I get it, but come on.
Well, Joey, what's happened in Portland? Are there troops there now? I don't think so, but I don't know. But hasn't Portland literally been falling on hard times? Like, the city's got way more crime than it did in the past. And because my institutional thinking on this is, I don't care how bad it is. I'm from Columbus, Ohio, and now I live in Austin, Texas. So for me to pay higher federal taxes so that they can go clean up Portland, I'm like, isn't that Portland's problem? But let's get the scale of the problem. Do you have any numbers for us on how bad things are there?
No, I do not have any numbers for us at the ready, Tim, with how bad things are there. But I think I can say on the point about whose problem, it is definitely the president's problem to protect federal institutions, indeed his number one job. So I think the real wrinkle with this for the left is the ground zero is the ICE facilities and related to the enforcement of the immigration dynamic, because they're largely camped outside of ICE. And it has been since early June, which is over 100 days now. Every night there has been direct confrontation, which has included attempts to breach the ICE facility and shooting bottle rockets and other explosives and assaulting officers. So if you wanted to deny the president any moral high ground for using any sort of federal force domestically, doing your violent protests against the federal institution is not the intelligent way to do it. But they can't resist.
Well, and I'll say I have no problem with federal forces being sent out to protect federal property and federal officers engaging in their lawful duties. I think that's anyone who has a problem with that. I got a problem with them. And so I just think it's more of an overkill sort of situation than anything else. And obviously it fits with the larger pattern. And politically, I think this makes a lot of sense. I think a lot of folks are saying, hey, our cities are cesspools of crime and awfulness. And finally, President Trump is doing something. And if it takes sending in troops, well, that's perfectly fine. That's not how many of us on the left see it. But I think for a lot of regular Americans, I think this is a winning issue, even if, and I think this is true, even if people think there's a lot more crime and awfulness going on than there actually is. That perception is what matters. And so I think this is a lot of my fellow folks on the left cannot see this, but I think this is a lot more popular with regular Americans than a lot of folks on the left understand. And the whole, this is authoritarianism. I certainly feel that way, but I get that my reaction is probably going to be very different from a lot of other folks. I don't like it, but I think politically it makes a lot of sense. Republicans have historically done so much better than Democrats on crime issues, still do for a lot of reasons. I think this is just smart politics, even though I think it's bad policy.
Well, I tend to, if I can, Joey, I tend to agree for nuanced reasons that the politics here feel like a slam dunk. Crime is increasingly rated as a top issue. Even, left and right, there's more disorder. Everybody sees it. The people on the left say, well, look at J6. Okay, I think you see hypocrisy charges thrown around a little bit too much, but here's one where, folks don't like the disorder of January 6th, but they also didn't like the disorder of assassinations and the gun crimes that are happening. It just feels like one, with the news media hyping it, but two, the reality is, coming out of COVID, the Black Lives Matter, there was just so much disorder. And then there is a real problem in these cities where you have district attorneys who won't put criminals away. So here in Austin, it is an eerie landscape, guys, to walk around downtown Austin. You just see homelessness, really tragic mental illness of people wandering around the streets. And we're pretending there aren't two different realities, where I wouldn't say it's half and half, but about 4 out of every 5 people are kind of, I would say, normal. And the numbers are huge. 1 out of 5, 20%. There's just homelessness. So sometimes they're laying down, sprawled out, sleeping. They've got a big crew of people to clean up the feces and the urine every morning, so you don't see it, but you see the people. And that's just distressing as heck. So Trump wins politically. The question is, are we a federalist society or not? Do we, the Federalist Paper is still true? Does the 10th Amendment hold that the federal government's got limited scope and it's up to these cities to police themselves? And when they do it badly, and I point to Detroit, where I was almost born, Detroit had once upon a time 2 million people. I don't think it's even got 1 million now, because folks just left. They voted with their feet. Man, that's been a powerful component of progress. So the question, I'll turn it now back to you, Joey. How does it end? Say Trump sends the troops in and it works, and Portland becomes this place where crime goes down by half. To Mike's point, it doesn't go down to 0, but it goes down by half. What president's ever going to be able to take troops out of these cities?
Well, I hope it ends with, protecting our federal institutions to do their jobs, and the leadership in all the cities doing their jobs. I think that this is a complicated issue, Tim, you raised. I think you said it was nuanced for principled thinking conservatives, which I think is a great way to describe it. I have very strong anti-authoritarian impulses. I have very strong contrarian local control federalism impulses. And I would be a much more sympathetic voice or landing board for arguments related to anti-federal use of any federal assets for law enforcement if I didn't think that there's a larger issue in America going on tied to some longtime historic global narratives about Western civilization and progress and leftist influences. So I think these points are worth making. So I'll circle back to a threshold point. I think one of President Trump's greatest structural contributions to American history is that America in our free society has been being institutionally groomed with leftist impulses for several decades, like the frog boiling in the pot of water, that at some point it gets too hot. And how do you reverse it? And President Trump kicked the pot off the stove is one way to think about President Trump. And it gives our country a better fighting chance to fight off those influences to preserve our position and our contribution to the advancement of mankind and Western civilization. So leftist opposition and leftist takeover of governmental apparatus historically is very violent. And it's very violent in a way that includes the branding and name calling of things like fascist, because if you go back even to the Antifa, I believe the academic understanding of Antifa is that it's loosely borrowed from some German groups before and after the rise of the Nazis that were opposing the Nazi regime, of which one of them were the communists. And if you study old school Germany in that era, let's be honest, the Nazis and the communists were not the free market capitalists versus the lefts. It was strains of leftism, economic leftism, socialism, and communism. The communists called them, they were the fascists, and the other side was the anti-nationalists, and they fought for bloody preeminence. So in these cities, when you have violent insurrection and organized destabilizing chaos that is violence, I see that as not unintelligent, I'll say intelligent, organized leftist attempt to destabilize America. And it takes advantage of our freedom to be in our resources and our money to try to defeat us from the inside. So America has got to have the levers while respecting all of our laws and traditions and our constitutional rights, which are non-negotiable, to also not hang ourselves on the rope of our freedom and allow us to protect and preserve America for centuries and generations. So standing strong against organized, chaotic resistance to the enforcement of federal law or the enforcement of law is a value that needs to happen even within the First Amendment. And we can't be weak. We can't be weak to say, well, people have to be able to say whatever they want to say, which is true, or people need to be able to protest, which is true, without saying, yeah, but you cannot fund, organize, and effectuate violent resistance to the government as a means of destabilizing it.
Let me turn this as a question to you, Mike, because I think I'm not sure the method I agree with, but I think the analysis is right here. And it occurs to me, in a country with 333 million, are these protesters that are so violent that are attacking ICE, is it 150 million of our population that feel that way, or is it 1 million people? I'm pretty sure it's even well known that it's a couple thousand hyper hard left guys that are in this Antifa. And I know you said it's not really leaded. Okay, but it's still those same guys, and they're not really put away. They were protesting. It was free speech. You get these soft. So I don't know. Is the left making a mistake by identifying with these knucklehead extremists?
Well, I sure think so, but I understand that's not necessarily a widely held position. I mean, on the left, I hear what you were saying, Joey, about this idea of trying to essentially destabilize the government. On the left, I would say we don't really look at it quite like that. We see it as trying to halt a disturbing slide into or just jump into authoritarianism when you see troops in the streets and things like and that kind of use of force and the sort of rhetoric that we see out of the administration. Now, I disagree. I do agree that the Trump approach to to immigration is completely wrong, horrifically wrong on a lot of ways. That's a whole other issue. But I disagree with violence as a response to that from anyone. And I guess to me, here's my main concern as kind of a center-left person. If the administration wants to come out against political violence, political extremism, I'm 100% all for that. My concern is, just like you guys remember back when on the right, so many people were upset about the Obama-era IRS seemingly investigating all sorts of left-wing organizations. And so, well, maybe they're doing stuff wrong. But the point was, well, why are you focusing specifically on right-wing organizations from the Obama IRS? Well, this to me seems to be the same sort of things. And you know what? We're gonna focus on terrorism, but left-wing terrorism, when historically in the recent past, right-wing terrorism is in a much bigger issue. And so I think people on the left are understandably saying, so what you're saying is that you're going to be investigating me and anyone who funds me, and maybe I'm not exactly Antifa, but maybe I'm sympathetic, and maybe that's going to cause problems and so forth. That, to me, raises some really significant First Amendment issues and goes against, I think, the heart of what we are as Americans, just as much as I think, Republicans, conservatives had a point with selective investigation and prosecution of folks on the right from them.
I want to throw a penalty flag here, buddy. Yeah. So I don't know of any right-wing groups that were attacking federal building. Now, you can say January 6th. Fine. I didn't like it. I've never been supportive of that. Who's attacking federal buildings? Like, let's take this, your side, my side. What should we do with them? And if the Portland DA won't put these guys in jail and keeps letting them out again, at some point, I think they've basically laid the groundwork for Trump to get a win here on the left. It's a big mistake.
I don't disagree. Again, I think anyone who engages in illegal activity in support of whatever cause, however right they think it is, should pay the consequences for engaging in that illegal activity. And I don't care if they're on my side or on the other side. I don't care about the aims or the goals. I'm concerned about the means. And if the means are illegal, I want to see those people arrested and serve whatever time is appropriate. And that, to me, is, I want the administration to come out and saying, listen, we're not okay with any sort of violent extremism. We don't care where it comes from, and we're going to crack down on that, not just on violent extremism on the left. I think I understand why they're doing it politically, but I think it's wrong morally.
Mike, I think the problem with the equivalence for me in this particular instance, that's why I would otherwise be a sympathetic ear, is that historically, the leftist, global leftist approach. And if you think about Vietnam, to my military friends on the program here, what was the communist strategy to fight us in Vietnam? You got to grab them by the belt buckle. And I think the problem with right now is that the leftist global influences are trying to get America by the belt buckle. And I think they've got a real good grip on the belt buckle of the Democratic Party, which is why Chuck Schumer shut the government down, because he's worried about a primary challenge from AOC. So I think that we need Republicans. To my Democrat friends, we'd love for you to join us in the Republican Party and the party of freedom in America right now. But we need those who are not and who are in the Democratic Party, the patriots in the Democratic Party, to be strong and to keep our country going in the direction that it needs to go, and be cognizant of the fact that we've got to shake malignant leftist influences off of our belt buckle.
Okay. Any other thoughts on this one, Tim?
No, very interesting. And it's certainly one that's going to be a live wire. Crime in America is a winner for Republicans. Democrats keep soft serving it up. And I think Joey's out. Why is it happening? There's weird funding from overseas groups that would love to see America tear itself apart. And I think sympathizing with, rioters is just so hurtful to our politics. So Trump's gonna win on this one until it's over. But it's gonna be a years long thing. I think we'll be revisiting this maybe every show to see how it unfolds. I would just rather see that there are healthy cities out there, I would remind everybody, that are booming. Their population is voting with their feet. The next census will show California is losing congressional seats. This is the first time this has happened. I mean, if you look back in the 70s and the 80s, they would get 7 seats, 8 more seats, 3 more seats. I think they're going to lose 3 seats. Look at the states that are growing. Those are the states with good government. I hope we will remember that's the model that's made America as wonderful as it is and keep federalism alive. So I'm a little worried about this, even though I'm very sympathetic with everything Joey said. But that's my final word. Well, let's revisit it when we get together next.
Yeah. All right. Well, we will close on that. And folks, if there's anything we talked about that you disagreed with or you have a question about, we'd love to hear from you. You can reach us at mail@politicsguys.com. Also on Facebook or X. We always put links in the show notes. There's also our Discord discussion forum for supporters. I'm on that all the time. And if you're a supporter, you get that. You also get ad-free versions of everything we release. Our full-length midweek episode as opposed to that, like 15-minute snippet preview kind of thing. And so we hope you'll consider that. That really is what helps keep us going. And we always put those support links in the show notes as well. And if you really want to commit to us month to month on Patreon, it's too much, or you got issues with them, I don't know, whatever, I had a bad experience. Well, we also have PayPal and Venmo options as well. And if you're not financially able to support us right now, but you would like to get that full midweek episode, just let me know. Send me an email, mike@politicsguys.com, and I will be happy to get that set up for you. And whether you're a supporter or not, it really does help us out a lot if you could subscribe, rate, and review the podcast on whatever app you're using, as well as sharing episodes on social media. And as always, before we go, a very special thanks to our wonderful executive producers. They are Wilma Moreno, Daniel Toe, Ryan Beasley, Don Oglesby, Derek Schmidt, Dakota Heath, Jason Chrysler, Dave Dean, Jeremy Larson, Brian Matza, and Jody Marie Miller. We'll be back with a new episode for you next week. We hope you'll join us.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group,